Countryside Alliance and the NFU have been gunning, and I mean that literally, for this to happen, because they want a backdoor repeal of the Hunting with Dogs Act, they want a backdoor repeal of the protected status of badgers, and they want to have absolutely unlimited access to the countryside to kill what the hell they like. So the other thing that's been worrying me about discussions about how to tackle bovine TB in cattle is a lot of people have talked about biosecurity, and I've heard very influential people make out that that means separating badgers from cattle, but that actually won't make an ounce of difference to bovine TB. So I'm just going to very, very quickly outline 15 steps that farmers can actually do that will make a difference and doesn't necessarily cost much money either. The first and most important is to use the gamma interferon test and not the skin test. The skin test has been misapplied in this country for generations. It was only ever intended to give an indication of bovine TB in a herd, not in an individual cow. It has a 20% failure rate, that is 20% of cattle do not react to it and therefore remain in the herd to infect the rest of the herd. It is a deeply flawed test, but only if you use it for an individual cow. In many parts of Europe, if they get reactors within a herd, they remove the entire herd. That is, they kill the whole herd. And in some parts of Europe, they actually remove the top metre of topsoil as well, because they understand there that bovine TB is an environmental disease. It can exist in the soil for up to 2 years. It can exist in the watercourses likewise. The second important thing is to bring back the use of TB-resistant breeds of cattle that don't need to be housed indoors for half of the year. We've replaced our indigenous British breeds with high-yielding European Holsteins, which are not designed to cope with the wet, cold British weather. Needless to say, we then have to house them indoors for between 6 and 8 months of the year in close proximity, which is exactly the right kind of environment to spread bovine TB cow to cow. In addition to that, as if that wasn't bad enough, they then produce, each cow will produce 1 churnful of slurry a day, and that's got to go somewhere. Generally it goes into lagoons under cover, where it can't be affected by ultraviolet light, and it doesn't get the opportunity to dry out. So it breeds like heck in there. And then that is spread on fields, often very many miles away from the cow that produced it. So on this subject of slurry, don't spread it far away from the cattle that produced it. Don't aerosol it when spreading, because sometimes some machinery can actually break it up into such fine particles it can drift right across several farms. And don't spread it on waterlogged land. If you have acidic soils, lime them. This was something that was done away with during Mrs. Thatcher's reign, when she had she told farmers that they wouldn't receive a subsidy for liming their soils anymore. Consequently, because bovine TB likes acidic soils, that's helped to increase the spread of it. Provide mineral licks if feeding maize to cattle to prevent mineral deficiencies, and I know some farmers who are also supplying mineral licks for their badgers, because badgers, like cattle, will end up with a mineral deficiency if they feed exclusively on maize. Do not allow cattle to graze on TB-infected land for a minimum of 2 years to allow the disease to die out in the soil, which is similar, but not quite so drastic as what they do in Europe, at very good effect. If you have badgers living on TB-infected land, vaccinate them against bovine TB. Well, yep, that makes sense. Insist on better biosecurity in the cattle markets you use. We know from last year that there was some undercover filming in cattle markets in the West Country, where the majority of Britain's cattle are. One of them was in a ring that is specifically for TB-infected cattle. There was absolutely zero biosecurity in that market. 13, clean the tyres and wheel arches of machinery which has been on TB-infected land. Now, it's very interesting about this, because there was a Facebook page for the hire firm company that were that the vehicles were being used by the culling companies in the badger cull zones. And I messaged them on their Facebook page about this and said, I hope you realise that unless you are disinfecting the wheel arches and the tyres of all those vehicles that are travelling all over TB infected land, you are actively spreading the disease. And I found it immensely gratifying that the following day they pulled out of the badger cull. 14, do not allow unchecked travel from potential TB infected land onto your own cattle pastures by machinery, cars, horses or boots. Now this is especially important when you consider the role of the hunt in all of this. You have horses charging across largely pasture land because they're not going to be trampling crops on the whole. They have generally permission to be there, but they can run across TB infected land with all that soil packing up underneath the hooves and spreading it who knows where. And 15, and finally, talk with your neighbours about the measures you are taking to prevent bovine TB on your land and ask for their cooperation. It's only by people actually talking about this sensibly and scientifically that we can stop this this problem in the cattle industry. And let's be reminded here that it is actually a very small problem in terms of the number of cattle that are killed in relation to all the other reasons that cattle are killed when they're in the dairy industry. Thank you very much. People in Somerset that I know, the farmers I know of that had intimidation in Somerset, some of them were being intimidated by people like feed supply companies. So they can be maybe connected to the NFU and the Countryside Alliance, or maybe not. But either way, it's community pressure, yeah? But they were also being threatened with physical violence from members of the Countryside Alliance and the NFU. So, and those kind of people are very much involved with hunting. We know what terrier men are like and the violence that they seem to think is perfectly acceptable. This is what's actually happening to rural communities. They're having to deal with the worst kind of psychopaths that you can think of. And one of the things I said at my speech in Birmingham, which you might not realise that most of the audience was nodding vigorously because it was all quiet, they were really taking in what I was saying. But what we found in the Somerset Badger Cull Zone, those of us that went up there and spent time up there during the culls, we also went up beforehand to do set surveying as well, but that's another matter. But those of us who went up, we found that not only were protesters being threatened with all kinds of violence, but female protesters were singled out especially. Anyone that works in domestic violence, which I have done in the past, knows that the men that abuse women and children start off by abusing animals. These people are living in rural communities and they're going to badger cull zones in order to get their kicks. They're not doing it for the money, they're doing it for the thrill of being able to run riot around the British countryside with military grade weaponry, with bullets with an up to 2-mile trajectory, and no one telling them off if they ram the cars of protesters or throw fireworks underneath their cars or shoot over their heads. It's outrageous, absolutely outrageous. And I live rurally, I work rurally, I don't want to see this coming to my community.